Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story is the final chapter in the incredible series Shadows over Mobile Bay by the wonderful mind of Wayne Harbison. As ever, please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share, it really does help with the channel and our community further. And of course, don't forget to hashtag TeamFEAR. Always on the lookout for fresh content, guys, whether it's true or fictional. You can get in touch either by email, which is dmtforesterfear@gmail.com, or of course head over to the website, which is www.dmtforesterfear.com. And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story, entitled Shadows over Mobile Bay. Chapter 4. Let's get straight into that. With the death of Westhall, we had nearly a score of years of peace and prosperity. Bon Secours had been constructed, Gulf City prospered around us, and she was free of much of the troubles that plagued her sister city, Mobile, across the bay. A year and a day after our wedding, Elvira presented me with twins, a boy and a girl, which we named Ophir and Opal. Terry grew stronger and became a scholar of history and all things Witchkin. He never married and lived the life of a bachelor. I had my suspicions that his tastes may lay among the ancient Greeks, but not even this could cause me to rebuke him. He was a good brother, a good man, a good uncle to my children. Alabama was readmitted to the Union in 1875 in spite of its citizens failing to ratify the Redeemer Constitution, and Reconstruction was deemed complete. Slowly, men of goodwill and ability came to pilot the ship of state, and a small bit of the damage done by Reconstruction was alleviated. There were still issues with meddlers from the north, specifically New Englanders, who were determined to see that Alabama and its sisters of the old Confederacy were going to be forever shackled with the chains of poverty. Their interference saw slaves replaced with sharecroppers, more akin to the serfs of old Europe than free man. This particular evil institution enslaved families of both races into chains of poverty that were more hideous than slavery itself. But time marched on, and so did progress, as much of the state's natural resources began to be harvested for use by industry, and many of the poorer counties in North Alabama began to grow if not thrive. In the early 1870s, the city of Birmingham was founded in Jefferson County, and because of its proximity to coal, iron, and limestone, it became the Pittsburgh of the South. The state and the country had begun to heal, but I doubted it would ever see the glory days of the Old South. And our family grew in prosperity and influence due to some shrewd investments I made at this time. Mrs. Beaumere came to live with us not long after Elvira and I married, and helped us hammer Bon Secours into a home worthy of the name. When the children were older, she and grandmother began to help them master their budding witcheries. Teddy left us for a while to attend medical school in Vienna, where he made many friends in the organization he called Lucent Via, the Shining Path. It was a society that knew about the Witchkin and worked to keep the normal folk safe from its darker elements. He then returned home to take up his role of beloved brother and uncle. He became confidante, tutor, and teacher to the children whom he outright spoiled. Life was good. Then, in their 15th year, it all went to hell, and my life on this earth as head of the family ended. It was early autumn, and the family had been kept inside for nearly 2 weeks by a combination of rains and a strain of influenza that rocked the city. I was in my study working, trying to shake the feeling that something had changed. It was the feeling that kept thrumming through my body and soul. I should have paid attention, but to be honest, our lives had been so quiet on the Witchkin front that I had grown complacent, and that cost me everything. "Father," Ophir asked from the door of my study, "may I come in?" Smiling, I pushed back the ledger in which I was reviewing our finances. "Of course," I told him. He was tall and lanky, with the same champagne colour of blonde as myself and his sister. His eyes were Dubois blue, and he had his mother's nearly perfect, unblemished skin. He was wearing a smart day suit of bone and black, and he was carrying a tray from the kitchen with some meat, probably ham, sliced apple and cheese upon it. Mother thought you might want something to eat. I smiled at him, recognising the ruse. He wanted something, and delivering to me something to eat might make me more agreeable. Thank you. I was wondering, he began, if it might be all right that Opal and I go for a walk. We've been cooped up in a house for 2 weeks. We won't leave the property. I smiled at his reticence. I think it should be fine. Just stay close to the house. Yes, sir, he told me as he backed from the room. Oh, and a fear. Yes, sir, he replied, stopping at the door. Don't let Opal have her way too often, I told him with a smile. I knew that he'd probably been put up to this by asking his sister. She usually liked to get him to do things she wanted and then convince herself and others that it was his idea, especially when it meant that they would be in trouble. Yes, sir, he replied with a smile before disappearing down the hall as I returned to my ledger and took up occasionally nibbling at the food he'd brought me. I know not how long I was thus engaged until I heard his voice scream in my head. Get away from her! Fear, anger, and dread all surged through my body as I could almost feel the beast in his soul swell to the surface. Pushing myself back from the desk, I rose and pelted down the hall and out to the front of the house. In the distance along the road to the town, I saw a sight to make my blood run cold. It was another Guina, locked in mortal combat with a huge white-furred man-cat. Ophir had no experience in fighting in his new form, and based on the fear and near panic at something he'd seen, the panic was coming from him in waves, and I realised that he probably had not taken the form purposefully. He was already badly injured, the thing having opened up a huge gash that ran from his hairline down the side of his face to the end of his jaw. Between one step and the next, I summoned my own beast and waded into the fray as the Guina caught poor Ophir with a downstroked claw, slamming him onto the ground at his feet, unmoving. I hit it square midship, as the sailors say, before it could close its fetid-smelling mouth around the back of my son's neck and finish him. We tumbled down the road towards an oak sapling that stuck out over the water. I could smell not only the unholy stench of this creature, but my son's blood as well, and a darker sulphurous smell that triggered memories of the fight at Chateau de la Mer with another of its kind. And for the life of me, I could see neither hide nor hair of the opal, and that frightened me more than the sight of my son battling this hell beast. Locked in a snarling embrace with the Guina, we tumbled over the sapling and out into the water. Now we scrambled to drown each other, but here I had an advantage. As Grandmother McNaughton had once commented, there was a strong line of Nixie in our family tree, and so I could very nearly breathe water. With a burst of strength and power, the Guina threw me off its back and scrambled for the surface of the river, trying to escape my claws and teeth. Pulling itself up onto the bank, it sat there panting for long seconds as I closed in with it from behind. Just before I reached for its back paw to haul it back into the water, it was hit by another white-capped beast with bone-crushing force. I was dangerous to the beast. My wife, however, was protecting her children and was lethal. I slammed into its back, sinking my claws up and under the ribcage, searching for my target as Elviria's fangs ripped into its throat. A wet gurgle of surprise escaped its ruined throat as my claws closed around the beast's beating heart, and with a great heave pulled it from the beast's chest. In a near panic, I looked around for Opal, only to see Ophir was now once again human, and now was laying naked on the ground, blood pooling next to his head. In the distance, I could see Teddy coming charging out of the house, rifle in his hands as he hobbled as fast as he could on his articulated wooden leg. He fell twice before joining me next to Ophir, whose eyes suddenly fluttered open. "Where's your sister?" I demanded through a mouth made for ripping and tearing, not for speaking. "He has her," the boy groaned. "Who?" Teddy demanded. "Old man, with misshapen yellow teeth," the boy said, trying to sit up, only to groan in pain, roll over, and emptied the contents of his stomach onto the autumn wet leaves under the tree. I picked an image from his mind and growled at what I saw. Westhall. Teddy looked up at me and said, "I'll take him back to the house. Find Opal." His voice was calm and collected. Before I could protest, he was joined by a very wary Donovan. "I'll carry him, sir," the redhead said gently, picking up my son and carrying him back to the house. Elvira and I looked at each other. Our communication was nearly mental. She would stay at the house and see to Ophir's care. I would go in search of Opal. I quickly turned back down the road and then leapt into the air. Before I hit the ground again, my wings were catching the wind and gaining a lift. The sight of 500 pounds of white swamp painter might frighten people, but a white hawk was going to be mostly ignored. For hours I wheeled and dived as I searched in vain for my daughter. I tried to reach out with my witcheries to find her, but something was blocking that. Even getting a bearing on her location was impossible. I was left searching the ground, flying low over the treetops, scanning for any sight of her. And sometime after sundown, another white painter joined me on the ground, searching for our child by scent. After a while, we decided that I would change to my owl form and fly west out over the bay and search the Mobile area, and she would head south towards Bon Secours. If I had been in my right mind, I would have realized where she was, but I will be the first to admit that my mind was not clear, and that lack of clarity was our undoing. I know I frightened many cats, mice, and even small dogs as I flew overhead, searching the city in a spiral that grew larger with each pass. Occasionally checking with Elvira via our witcheries, I discovered that she was having as little luck as I was myself. It was well past midnight when I heard a witch call from Teddy. Something had happened back at Bon Secours. Landing onto the balcony outside Elvira's and my bedroom, I shifted up to my human form and slipped through the French doors. Grabbing some fresh clothing, I hurried down the hall to where I could hear Teddy moving around. The clicks of the articulation of his leg identifying him. Entering the room without knocking, I found Ophir sleeping soundly, as Teddy was applying a cold compress to a gash in Donovan's head. "What has happened?" I asked. "Some kind of hell creature came into the house. Donovan got a shot off at it before it knocked him into the wall." He held up the Colt our state captain carried. "By the time I got here, it was gone." "What did it look like?" I asked. "Thin, sir," Donovan said weakly. "Its head was huge and bald. Its eyes were black pools of shadow. It had sharp canine teeth and hands that were far too big for its size. Its limbs seemed to stretch and contract like rubber as it moved. One minute there was only myself and young Master Ophir. The next it just appeared in a room. I hid it." He looked at the pistol in Teddy's hand. "I'm sure of that, but it didn't even slow it down. It's strong." He stopped as his stomach threatened to rebel. After swallowing hard, he continued. "It's immensely strong. It knocked me around like a ragdoll." "Anything else?" I asked. He shook his head and then groaned in pain. "No, sir. It was gone as fast as it was here." I nodded and looked at Teddy. "Take care of him, Theodore. I'm going back out to find this creature and find my daughter." "Be careful, Dan," he told me. I shook my head. "Caution has no place in this hunt, brother. I will get my daughter back and I will destroy this thing." With that, I turned on my heel and returned to our bedroom, where I disrobed and took up the hunt yet again. For hours I searched the night in vain for traces of either one. Towards sunrise, I made my way back to Bon Secours. Out of desperation, I checked the cabin where Merlin Holmwood and I had fought our first and last battle so many years before. Entering it, my blood ran cold. I could sense, smell, feel the evil of Westhall before my eyes picked up on the crumpled clothing lying in the corner. I recognized the dress that Opal had been wearing this morning, and I could see where the table to which I had once been manacled had been repaired, and it showed signs of recent strain. A cup and a black blade lay next to it, and I could smell dark blood inside of it. My heart sank into a pit at the thought of what horrible fate might have befallen my child, my daughter. The beast in my heart surged, and I threw back my head and roared in frustration and rage. It was at this point that I could almost hear Westhall's laugh echo through the cabin, taunting me as it gloated over what it had done. Suddenly, my connection to Elvira was severed in a flash of surprise and pain. A pit in my soul opened wide and began to swallow my mind. The gentle stream of support that had always flowed both ways between us was abruptly cut off, and I felt all that she was, all that she would ever be, perish from my mind, erased from this world forever. In a blind rage, punctuated by grief and loss, I screamed again into the night and took off at a dead run as fast as a cat's feet could carry me towards the direction I had last sensed Elvira. I know not how long I travelled, but I know that I covered ground, water and obstacles in an arrow-straight path, going over or through anything that stood between me and my wife. I could smell it before I ever saw it. The coppery odour of blood, punctuated by something else, something evil, something familiar. It filled the air at the edge of the swamp where I found my dear, sweet Elvira lying. Her cream and navy dress was soaked in blood. Her hair was tangled and torn, and her throat had been opened by claw and fang. The shell that lay before me was empty of life and wit. Elvira was gone, and with her part of my very soul. I know not when or how I changed back to my human form as a dark pall fell over my being. I am told that Teddy and Johnson had found me there, naked and weeping beside my beloved wife. My own mind did not want to return to me for several days, and my beloved Elvira was laid to rest with only the shell of my body attending the services. It was grandmother who finally brought me out of my fugue state, with a firm rap across the jowls and a bolt of pure witchery. "Wake up, Sheridan!" she screamed into my mind and ears simultaneously. "We have to find this creature and stop it before it kills again. We have to find Westhall and make him pay for what he has done. Your son needs you." There was a fire and iron in those words. They shook me to the core. I know not whether it was the blow or the thought of Ophir that got through the wall of grief, but my wit and senses returned to me, and with them came the seething anger and hatred. Slowly, I nodded to my grandmother and then over to Miss Beaumere. I straightened my waistcoat and said, "You are of course correct. Grandmother, thank you." My voice sounded hollow and detached even to myself. "Where did we begin?" I asked. "With gathering information," Miss Beaumere said. "I would suggest you talk to Ophir." I gave her a confused look. "Ophir? Why?" "Because he has a theory, and it makes sense, and it fits the way Westhall does things perfectly." "A theory?" I asked. "He believes he does," Grandmother told me. "What is it?" "He'll have to tell you," she replied. "You are being unnecessarily vague," I told her. "Perhaps, but you need to hear it from him." "Where is he?" "He's gone out to hunt Westhall since you were unavailable." There was a strong accusatory tone to her voice, and it shamed me to my core. "You let him go alone? He's injured," I protested. "Not as injured as you were," Teddy said, entering the room. "You were nearly as catatonic as I was when you returned from the war." I glanced at the clock on the wall of the study where we found ourselves. It read 9:15, but I had to look out the window to find that it was in the evening. I realized I had no recollection of entering the room or of the last several days. The only memories I had of any of it was the gaping maw of sorrow that had nearly swallowed my mind and soul. A part of me realized, in shame, that such a fate would have satisfied Westhall quite a bit. "Where has he gone?" I asked. "To Bon Secours," Miss Beaumere said. "To the cabin in the swamp where Mr. Holmwood once held you in captivity." A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I knew that was where Westhall was, or at least had been. "I have to stop him. How long has he been gone?" 3 hours or so," Teddy said. "Westhall has been there. That is where he carried Opal," I told him, racing from the room as I pulled my tie from my neck. I took the stairs in 2s and 3s as I climbed towards mine and Elvira's bedchambers. I quickly shed my clothing on the bed, kicked off my boots, and wheeled the change I wanted, that I needed. Although an owl's sight would be more appropriate, I needed a falcon's speed. Quickly, I climbed high over the treetops and then took off like a shot in the direction of the cabin. Fortunately, there was a near full moon out, and that served me nearly as well as the owl's vision would have. Spying the cabin, I realized it was afire. I dove into a stoop, and at the last moment I spread my wings and changed into a man. I hit the roof with enough force to drop through the heavily reinforced surface between the trusses and land in the cabin centre next to the table, where deep in my heart I knew Opal had been held. As the room blazed around me, I saw Fear in his man-cat form in a cell that had once held me. He was throwing himself at the red-hot bars. I could hear and smell his fur sizzling each time he bounced from them. "Stand back!" I yelled to him. The huge beast stopped at the sound of my voice. I could feel the panic in his mind, but some part of him recognized me, and with a low growl, he stepped back from the bars. I grabbed the huge, reinforced table, ripped it from its bolts in the floor, and then hurled it into the bars. In a horrendous crash and a whoosh of air and flames, the iron bars came free of their moorings in the ceiling and fell inward at a 45-degree angle. I leaped atop of the desk and used my own weight to ride it to the rest of the way down. In a flash of white, Fear leapt past me and then up through the hole in the roof. I quickly followed him as an owl, but he was covering a lot of ground. He seemed to be following some invisible trail that I could not detect. Like a hound, he would stop momentarily, concentrate on something, sniff at the air, and then adjust his course. I came to realize that he was still connected with Opal, as only twins can be. He was following her using the connection they shared, a connection that probably reached back to the womb. I reached out with my own witcheries, trying to tap into their link, but found myself totally blocked by the rage in his mind. All I could do was follow and try to keep up. He headed north past Bon Secours and into Gulf City proper, following a path that only he could detect. He at least had the presence of mind to switch from his man-cat to a full painter when he got inside the city limits, and still, it was evident that he had been spotted several times, and more than one person disappeared into their homes, either to retrieve a gun or to lock the door against the beast that had come to stalk their streets. He navigated the streets and alleys as he tried to follow the link, and several times he was led into a blind alley created by the winding streets of the city. On more than one occasion, his presence broke up less than legal activities. He, however, paid none of it any mind, and he was fixated on finding his sister. And for hours he stalked the city, and I stalked him, hoping to find our missing Opal. It wasn't until nearly sunrise that we seemed to be closing in. Unfortunately, I realized that we would have to return home soon, or Fear would find himself in the middle of a street wearing nothing. Landing next to him, I transformed into my cat form and barred his path. With a mouth not designed for human speech, I told him, "We will come back. You are too close to losing the beast, and if you stay, you'll be exposed." I looked back at the building he was about to enter and added, "We know where to start later." For long moments, I thought he was going to fight me over it. I could feel the beast and the boy wrestling with each other. Even now, I am unsure as to which one won. He finally turned from the building and, with a flick of his tail, loped off into the shadows of the alleys. It took us nearly an hour to make our way back to Bon Secours, and in the end, we arrived just before the beast and his soul went to sleep. Fear was still young, and the battle of his wills between the man and the beast was still too evenly matched to rely on him being able to force his will upon the merger. As the sun began to peek over the trees to the east, I was making some arrangements with Donovan, knowing that he would take care of the details when I grabbed some rest and something to eat. Perhaps an hour later, Fear came downstairs to join Theodore and myself for breakfast. His face was worried and his voice terse with fatigue as he sat at the table. "I am pleased to see you have recovered, Father." There was a hint of accusatory challenge to his voice that I chose to ignore. "Thank you. You did well tonight. We will rest for a few hours, and then we will explore that building in the light of day, as upright men." He seemed surprised at my suggestion. "In the day? As men?" Many souls in the city got a glimpse of you last night, Fear. I'm afraid you've made your own contributions to the local legend of the White Painter." He smiled and nodded and confessed, "It is difficult sometimes to get the cat to do as I command." "It always is at first, Fear," I told him. "But you showed a great deal of control last night, and I was quite impressed." "Thank you, Father," he said as he looked down at the bowls of food that the cook was placing on the table. Grandmother entered the room to see us seated. She smiled as we stood and said, "You both expended a great deal of energy last evening. We're going to need our strength later today, so eat up and go get some rest." "Where's Grandmother Marie?" Fear asked. "She will be in directly. I believe she has been gathering certain items by the last light of the moon." "That sounds rather ominous," Fear said. "You have no idea, dear Fear," the lady in question replied from the door. "But trust me, you will learn." He chuckled and added, "Now that did sound ominous." "And so it should," Miss Beaumere said before taking a seat at the table. "I take it that you were busy last night?" Fear thinks he might have discovered where they are holding Opal. "About that," Theodore said, rising from the table. He went to the door and checked the hall to assure that we would not be disturbed, nor our conversation overheard by staff. "What?" I asked, not wanting to think about what in my heart I knew was going to be the hard truth. "I'm not sure that we're going to find Opal, at least not find her as she was before she was taken." He looked over to both Grandmother and my mother-in-law. "And both Grandmother and Mrs. Beaumere agree with me." He paused a moment and looked at Fear and added, "And I believe deep down in his heart, Fear agrees as well. He may not have yet admitted it to himself, though." "What?" I asked. "I'm not so sure that the creature that attacked Donovan, that killed poor dear Elvira, is not Opal." And there it was, the niggling thought that had been worrying at my brain for the most of the night. It took every fibre in my being to not stand and scream at Teddy for suggesting such a thing. Not because I didn't believe it to be true, but because some part of me did. In a calm and steady voice I asked, "And what brings you to this conclusion?" And Teddy frowned and said, "Sense, mostly. The scent that creature left in this house, Fear has described it as having an underlying scent of Opal. Grandmother and Mrs. Beaumere have confirmed that much for me." Fear put his cup of coffee down and said, "Father, as much as every instinct inside me screams to deny what Uncle Theodore says, deep down, I feel it too. The scent of the creature that I followed last night underlay the connection that I always had with Opal. Furthermore, I am getting no coherent thoughts from Opal, only aggression, thirst, hunger, and rage. There is no personality to the link, only instinct." I nodded and said, "But I have to be sure. I cannot simply write her off as a loss at this time. I have to see for myself that she has become this creature." "And what then?" Grandmother asked. "What will you do?" I shook my head. "I don't know. I cannot bring myself to kill one of my children, no matter how far she may have been corrupted." "Then what will you do, Sheridan?" Grandmother demanded. "You can't just lock her up in the basement. If she has become the thing that killed poor Elvira, she may be impossible to simply contain." "I will consider that when and if the time comes," I told her. "Until then, today's action will be a rescue mission. It will only become a capture and contain if and when I am assured that Opal is indeed lost." "Capture and contain?" Grandmother asked. "You were not thinking clearly, Sheridan. Even Fear realizes that there is nothing left of Opal in that thing, other than a few stray memories, blind aggression, and hatred." "Be that as it may, Grandmother, I will try and capture and contain her before I take the life of my own child, no matter what she has done." "Your loyalty is exemplary, Sheridan, but I fear you are bringing heartache onto yourself." "Perhaps, but I cannot change what I am, Grandmother." And she nodded and changed the subject. "And how do you plan on capturing her, or it?" I've already sent Donovan and a coach equipped with what I think we might need out to await us near the building where we tracked it. After breakfast, Ophir and I will ride out there and do what must be done." "Is there anything we can do to help?" Marie Beaumère asked. "Wait. I would say pray, but I've little truck with God since I returned from that recent unpleasantness to the north. Hope for luck and skill, I would say." 2 hours later, I found myself and Ophir riding side by side into Gulf City, carrying only small arms. I did, however, have my cavalry saber strapped under the fender of my saddle. I wasn't entirely a fool. We rode mostly in silence, each of us trapped in our own thoughts as we wrestled with our loss. We were far enough away that there was a little daylight left as we rode up to the alley where Donovan and Johnson were waiting with the coach. "Would Sir like for Johnson and myself to join you?" he asked earnestly. Shaking my head, I told him, "No. Ophir and I will handle it. Did you bring what I asked of you?" "Yes, sir. They're under the rug in the coach." "What?" Ophir asked. I smiled and sidled up to the door of the coach, opened it, and pulled out a length of chain with 4 manacles attached. "These." I laid them across my saddle horn and climbed down. "What are those?" he asked. "They stink to high heaven." I grinned and said, "They're a new chromium steel alloy with a thick silver plating." "Where in the world did you get those?" he asked, joining me on the ground. I waited until we were out of earshot of Johnson and Donovan. Although Donovan knew of our family's gifts and kept his own counsel, and Johnson suspected it was best not to invite gossip. I chuckled lightly before saying, "I ordered them when you and Opal were about 10 years old. I thought they might be useful in the early days of when your witcheries might start expressing themselves. They're bespelled to keep those so enchained from changing form or breaking them." "Silver chains?" he asked incredulously. "It was your mother's idea," I told him. He simply shook his head as we approached the side door. "What does the connection you have with Opal tell you?" He looked over at me and nodded, and then closed his eyes to concentrate. After several seconds he opened his eyes and said, "She's in there. She's sluggish and still partially asleep." "Anything else?" "I don't think she's alone." I grinned evilly and said, "Good. That means it's probably Westhall, and he has much to answer for." Next to me, Ophir frowned and drew a .44 Colt from his coat pocket. I thought it was interesting that he'd chosen that particular make and model. "You realize that we're about to be guilty of breaking and entering, don't you?" Stepping up to the door at the side of the building, I nodded and said, "It's unavoidable." Then, leaning back, I kicked in the door. Wham! I kicked harder, and then I realized as the door and its frame were launched across the interior of the building to slam against the far wall, I stepped in, drew my revolver, and looked around the large empty warehouse. And there was no light in the room, as the windows that ran along the wall 15 feet up had all been painted black to block out the sun. In the corner, I heard a low, feral growl. Looking in that direction, I saw a pasty white figure slink along the wall, avoiding a long rectangle of light coming from the door to pierce the darkness. Spinning on it, I watched as it came closer. 1 second it was 30 feet away, and then in an instant it was half that distance. Then it disappeared completely, and I saw the form of my 15-year-old daughter standing there, in the dress I knew had burned at the cabin in the swamp. Her voice was pleading as she asked, "Father, is that you?" My heart caught in my throat. I felt tears well up in my eyes as my mind and heart battled between hope and despair. "Opal?" I asked. Even I could hear the conflict in my own voice. This was my little girl. And then she was standing right in front of me, arms open wide, a gentle smile upon her face. She was safe. The last few days washed from my mind, and all I could think of was that my daughter had been returned to me. I felt her arms around my neck as she raised up onto the tip of her toes to kiss me on the cheek, as was her habit. "That's not Opal!" I heard her fierce scream, and then suddenly I was ripped from her grasp, and there was a flash of lightning and the sound of thunder as I was hurled to the hard brick floor of the warehouse. Looking up, I saw Ophir grappling with the creature I had been seen slinking along the walls. As they tumbled into the light, I could hear the sizzling of burning flesh and see smoke rise from its skin in the fading daylight. Then a voice rough as sandpaper echoed through the hall. "What do you think of my creation, Captain McNaughton? What do you think of your sweet virginal daughter now? Not quite so sweet anymore, or virginal." I spun around, looking for the least movement, the least sight of the evil creature that was Westhall. "Show yourself!" I yelled. "Why?" it asked. "This is far more entertaining. Your children battle each other while I watch you slip further and further into the darkness of despair as you realize how you violated your daughter, your family. I have destroyed you, Captain McNaughton, and you don't even realize it yet. The McNaughton name will die with you, and you are not long for this mortal coil." In a near frenzy, I searched the darkness, trying to peel back the cloak of the shadows which Westhall was hiding himself. And every few seconds, I would sense something touching my mind, reaching out as if to say, "Not here." And all the while the light through the broken doorway creeped towards the threshold with the settling of the sun. A movement in the corner caught my eye. Frantically, I fired at it, only to hear the zing of a ricochet. "Show yourself, Westhall!" I demanded, and only his raspy cackle answered my demand. "Ha ha 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 ha! Ha 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 ha! Father!" I heard Ophir cry. "I could use some help here." Turning, I saw the hell creature that once had been my daughter, that still was my daughter, had opened up several gashes on Ophir's arms and chest. I could smell the pus and decay emanating from the wounds. She, was sitting lewdly astride his hips as he fought to keep her away from his face, the claws that extended from her oversized hands and elongated arms. The thing turned to look me dead in the eye, and its face became my beloved Opal. "Father, he's hurting me," I heard my own insipid voice whine. "Ophir, don't hurt your sister." Suddenly, the roar of a long rifle filled the air, and the creature's head exploded backwards. Turning towards the door, I saw Donovan standing there with one of the Henrys from the estate in his hands. Behind me, I heard Ophir scrambling to rise as I stood there stunned, as much by Donovan's actions as by the events of the evening. "Donovan," Ophir said, "bring me those chains." "Yes, Master Ophir," the red-headed Irishman said as he scrambled with the chains and manacles I dropped. "It's putting itself back together." Ophir's voice was incredulous. "What manner of creature is this?" "It was your sister," I said softly, unmoving. "It is no longer my sister. Father, we must kill it." "No," I said, whirling on him. "Don't you dare suggest such a thing." I looked down to where the large hole in the thing's head was knitting itself closed. "Shackle it. Take it back to the house." "You cannot be serious. Father!" Ophir protested. I spun on him. "Do it!" I told him with my voice and my will. He simply nodded and continued to chain the thing with the silver-plated bonds I had brought. I know not how long I stood there. Something in my mind, in my soul, had snapped, and I could not piece together a coherent thought or plan. I know that Donovan came over to me and guided me outside. My mind was clouded with horror and grief. I had to fix things, but I knew not how. I had to make it right. I needed Elvira. She would know what to do. And then I remembered that she had died at the claws of that thing in there. And the despair threatened to overwhelm me. It was late at night when we returned to Bon Secours. As Ophir helped me down from the coach, Teddy came out to meet us, deep worry etched across his face. "What has happened?" I asked him. "Westhall was here earlier. He nearly burned down the place before we drove him off. Grandmother has gone in pursuit of him," he said. "How was your mission?" Ophir climbed down from his horse, his arm in a bandage, his shirt and waistcoat ripped and bandages showing under them. His wounds reeked of pus and infection, his face fever-wet with sweat. "We recovered the creature that Opal has become. Father will not let us put her out of her misery." Teddy nodded and said, "Go in and see Marie. Let her attend to your wounds." His voice sounded strong, confident. I envied him for that strength. Mine was about spent, and I had too much to do. Remembering my oath to him those long years ago in Bayou Menu, a feverish plan began to percolate in my mind. It was a plan that would allow me to contain Opal, one, to keep her alive, and to keep my word to my younger brother simultaneously. It was brilliant, if I did say so myself. Teddy, I want you to go this morning to the undertaker, purchase for us the strongest coffin made out of hardwood, preferably mock iron, if you can find it. Bring it back and install it in the old family crypt down by the river. What for? He demanded. Just do it, I told him as I looked towards the coach where Opal, or the creature that had once been her within it, was rattling its manacles and chains. Dan, you're not thinking clearly, he suggested. I asked you to do something for me, Tadpole. Just do it. My voice became harsh and hard, harder than I intended. He swallowed and nodded. Okay, I'll go get my coat. He then turned and left for the house. Donovan, Johnson, help me get it, her, into the basement before the sun comes up. The two men looked at each other, then nodded before opening the coach door. The creature within was struggling mightily against the silver in her bonds, but I had chosen well. They were bespelled by my grandmother, my wife, and her mother to block the use of witcheries by those who were contained within them. Still, it took a mighty effort from all three of us to wrestle her into the basement and lock her to the walls. When it was done, I set Johnson at the door to keep others out. I did not want anyone to come to harm, but I could not bring myself to take the life of my own flesh. But I could and would contain the evil that she had become. I would use evil's own creation to do it too. And looking to Donovan, I told him, go into town and bring me back the strongest lugging chain you can. At least 50 feet of it. And he nodded, yes sir, and then he left to carry out my orders. I made my way upstairs to find Mrs. Beaumere. Was cleaning Ophir's wounds, and I could hear her softly chanting, bespelling, and binding them simultaneously. Ophir was passed out from the fever. How is he? These wounds seem to instantly become infected. I think I can contain them, but he's going to have some impressive scars. For now, he'll sleep. Then looking at me, she asked, and that thing in the basement, is Opal? I nodded. It is. What are your plans, Captain McNaughton? I plan to seal her up so that she will never harm another person, be they McNaughton, Beaumere, or Dubois, I told her. But first there are several things I need to gather. Spellwork has never been your strength, Sheridan. Do you wish that I should do it? I shook my head and said, no. This is something I want. No, I need to do for myself. Nodding her head, she said, I understand. And with a wan smile, I told her, I hope so. And then I left. I had several places to visit, the first being the old slave cemetery down by the river. This was not going to be my usual approach to my witcheries, and I was going to set a watchman over Bon Secours that would guard her long after I was gone from this existence. I would keep my word to my brother, even at the cost of my very soul. By sundown, I was running on pure will, but I had all of my preparations completed. Spectres of my failures kept dancing on the edge of my vision. Their ghosts had come back to haunt me. I could hear them beckoning for me to join them with the whisperings of their recently past, as well as the ancient dead who I had awakened by moving their bones and the casting of my witcheries over them. When Teddy returned from town, I was busily writing this, my penultimate entry into the journals I have kept since returning from the war those long, long years ago. There was much to explain, and I knew that I would not survive what I was about to do, and Teddy and Ophir were going to want some explanation. I considered it was fortunate that grandmother had left to pursue Westhall, for if there was anyone who could thwart my plans, it would be her. The coffin is as you wish, Teddy said from the door. What is your plan? I closed the journal and slipped it and the stylus into my coat pocket. I plan to see Opal in that coffin for all of eternity. That is a crueler fate than simply killing her. His voice was calm and reasonable, and for some reason that troubled my already agitated soul. Perhaps, but I cannot bring myself to take her life, nor allow anyone else to do so. I am unsure if it is even possible to do so. Therefore, I am neutralizing her threat to the innocent and the damned alike." "Interesting choice of words," Teddy said. I chuckled. "I'm sorry. I'm just tired." "When was the last time you had a good night's sleep?" I shook my head and said, "I cannot remember, but I will sleep this evening when what has been done is done." "And that is?" "Seeing Opal interred in the family crypt, her coffin chained and locked, the crypt sealed, and certain witcheries set on the land." "Dan, you need to rest," he nearly pleaded. "You cannot continue like this." "There will be time for rest when I'm done," I told him. "Now, I have a request." "Anything within my power," he said. "Keep Ophir and Mrs. Beaumere in the house this evening. I don't want any distractions while I do what must be done." "And what is that?" His voice sounded far too reasonable. "We will discuss that when I'm done." It was half-truth, but one that I felt was necessary. "Very well," Teddy told me. I smiled and said, "Trust me, Tadpole. I will rest and explain everything I've done when it is completed." "Very well," he said softly. I could see the worry in his eyes. I crossed the room and pulled him into an embrace. "Until then, don't worry. I made you a promise long ago that I would not leave you, and I intend to keep that promise." He nodded and said, "Just be careful, Dan. I don't want to lose you." I smiled. His voice sounded like it did when we were younger and facing the infestation that had been that damned Yankee reconstruction. "You won't," I told him as I left the study. It didn't take long to find Donovan and Johnson. "Just one more deed, gentlemen, and your work this evening is done." "As you wish, sir," Donovan said. "We need to get her into the old family crypt. I intend to lock her away so that she cannot harm others." "Yes, sir," Johnson said. The feat was far easier said than done. As the sun was sinking, her strength increased exponentially. In the end, I was forced to do grave bodily harm to her so that we could move her while she repaired herself. Thus she was neutralized, while the three of us put her in the coffin, chains and all. When she was bound and placed within the confines of the mock iron casket, I saw her briefly return to my young girl that I knew and loved. She returned to being my daughter, and my heart nearly broke when she cried out, "No, father!" Gently, I brushed the blonde hair from her face. "No matter what you've done, I cannot bring myself to kill you, Opal. I can't kill my own flesh and blood, but I can't release you into the world." Some part of me recognized that with those words I had placed myself firmly in the realm of the mad. But there was a method to my madness, and it would bring sweet oblivion. The land would be warded, and my oath to Theodore would be kept. "No, father!" she shrieked. "Don't! I'll be good!" she pleaded. "Please! No!" Tears rolled down my face as her cries tore great holes in my soul. I closed the lid of the coffin, and her cries became so furiously foul curses that in some ways alleviated part of my pain. My daughter couldn't know those words or their meaning. Throwing the latch on the coffin, her curses became horrible laughs, a laugh that only the damned or the mad would understand. And with a determined hand, I nailed the coffin shut and then placed chains around it, securing them in place with bolts and screws, from which I then filed the threads so they could not be undone. Exiting the crypt, I looked to Donovan and Johnson. "I will seal the door. Under no circumstances should it ever be unsealed for as long as any McNaughton lives. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," Donovan said. I could see that he realized that I had no intention of returning to the house, at least not as I am now. He started to say something, but I held up my hand. I smiled and reminded him of the oath we shared. Murder and treason accepted, and then left to my discretion. "I understand, sir." He bowed his head in defeat. "Thank you, Donovan. Thank you, Johnson. I think that you will not see me again as I am now, but I am not leaving. I am only changing. You may return here at sunrise and recover the tools I had left." I pulled a journal from my pocket and added, "And this. Make sure Ophir gets it." "I will, sir," the redhead replied, his green eyes tear-bright as he turned and led Johnson away. When they were gone, I pulled the pack of the elixir I had prepared earlier, and before I could lose my nerve, I quaffed it in one draught. Picking up the journal, I recorded this, my final entry. I have now taken the elixir I prepared from the bodies of slaves. The guano will be built from the very tendons and flesh of my own body and soul. I have set a watcher over Bon Travail, and as such I will remain until the land itself decides that a watcher is no longer needed. Farewell, my brother. Farewell, my son. Perhaps it is time that the name McNaughton sleeps. Epilogue. Ophir closed his father's journal. He still could not understand why his father felt the need to do what he did. He was of the opinion, and it was one he shared with his uncle Theodore, that the loss of his mother and then the realization of what had happened to Opal had unhinged his father's mind. He had spiraled into madness in a matter of hours, and there was not a blessed thing anyone could have done to stop it, except perhaps Grandma Kate, and she had not been there. It had been a difficult time in Ophir's life, but he and his uncle Theodore had managed to muddle through. And Grandmother Kate had proven a most difficult obstacle to overcome when she returned to Mobile. She had, and in his opinion, rightfully so, taken Ophir's father's actions as an affront of what it meant to be a McNaughton or a Dubois. In the end, she simply walked away in disgust. Ophir and his uncle Theodore had decided between them that the name McNaughton should end with his uncle, and so they created a sizable strip end for Ophir and changed his name to McKnight. He had left Mobile Bay for Europe, where he had studied in Vienna for several years. It was a time to heal, a time to learn, a time to grow. Upon returning home, he decided it was now time to put what he knew, what his parents, his grandmother, and his family had taught him, to some good use. He could think of no better action than to help with the taming of the West. And, with those thoughts in mind, he exited the train he had taken to Fort Smith. He smiled down at the tin U.S. Marshal's star on his waistcoat. Leaving the train, he recovered his horse and belongings and headed over to the United States District Court for the Western District of Arkansas. He had an appointment with Judge Isaac Parker. It was time to forge a reputation with the name McKnight. Wow. Absolutely awesome, wonderful, wonderful story. Really has captured my heart and imagination this entire series. Thank you ever so much to my good brother Wayne Harbison for creating this masterpiece and allowing me to make a rendition on the show here as an exclusive. Guys and girls, you know the drill. As ever, please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And of course, don't forget to hashtag TeamFEAR. Over the next few days, guys, I will put this entire series together like the others, and probably be a lot more enjoyable once it's all in one video. As ever, I hope your week is going along splendidly and it's been productive. And above all, guys, remember, be safe, not sorry.